Breaking T. Hood's story just flipped the whole city upside down. Atlanta isn't whispering anymore, it's screaming. A rapper gone, a family grieving, and an autopsy report so explosive it could blow the roof off the self-defense narrative the police want you to swallow. 5 bullets, not one fired back. Tell me, how is that self-defense? How is that protection? Or is it just another cover-up wrapped in pretty police tape? You really expect us to believe that T. Hood, a man with his own gun by his side, just stood there and let himself be taken out like a target at a carnival game? Please, something stinks here, and it's not just in Snellville. And get this? That Frost's name is smack dab in the middle of the storm. Yeah, that Frost family, the love and hip-hop dynasty. The reality TV royalty suddenly starring in the deadliest plot twist Atlanta has ever seen. When celebrity drama collides with bullets and autopsy reports, you don't just have gossip, you've got gasoline on fire. So the question is, was this self-defense? Was this family drama gone nuclear? Or was this something way bigger, way darker that nobody wants to admit? Stick around, because once we dive in, you'll see why this case has every headline, every blog, and every late-night group chat locked on one name: T. Hood. Atlanta has always been a city where music, money, and power mix into something electric, but sometimes that electricity turns deadly, and the story of T. Hood is exactly that kind of storm, because what should have been the peak of his life has instead come the scandal. Nobody can stop talking about, and when you trace the threads, they lead you straight into the Frost family home turf. Into the blurred line between reality TV drama and real-life tragedy. T. Hood was not some anonymous face in the crowd. He had built a reputation in Atlanta's rap scene as a voice that people were starting to rally behind. The type of artist whose lyrics made the block nod, and whose energy made clubs shake. And beyond the music, he was also a father, which made his sudden violent death not just a statistic but a story dripping with heartbreak. On August 8th in Snellville, Georgia, that story took its ugliest turn when police were called to a house after neighbors heard gunfire and screaming, and when they entered, they found chaos. Kelsey Frost injured and T. Hood lying fatally wounded on the floor. Now here is the part that has everybody refusing to swallow the official line. T. Hood had a gun, but the autopsy shows it was never fired. Not one bullet left his weapon, yet his body carried 5 wounds across his back, abdomen, thighs, and even buttocks wounds that paint a picture not of a struggle for survival, but of someone being cornered and taken down. And yet within hours, whispers of self-defense began leaking from police statements as if they wanted to write the ending before anyone had time to ask the obvious questions. How is it self-defense if the man never shot back? How is it protection if the only bullets came from one side? How does that add up to anything but execution? This is where the Frost family name explodes into the narrative, because the prime suspect is none other than Kai Frost, son of Rashida and Kirk Frost, the same couple who have been staples of love and hip-hop Atlanta for years, building a brand on scandal and survival. For reality TV watchers, the Frosts were always messy but entertaining. A couple who fought, cheated, reconciled, and cashed in on the chaos. But this time, there are no cameras rolling and no reunion episode to patch things up, because their son's name is being tied to a homicide that has the entire city buzzing. And it gets worse, because T. Hood was not just randomly in their orbit. He was in a relationship with Kai's half-sister Kelsey, who was in the house the night everything went down, which turns this from a simple police report into a tangled web of family drama, romance, and betrayal. Imagine the energy in that house, the tension of a rapper dating the sister, the presence of the brother, emotions spiraling, and then the eruption of violence. It reads like a script too dark for VH1, but here it is playing out in real life. The moment the news broke, social media lit up. Memes, conspiracy threads, Instagram lives dissecting every rumor. Some people quick to call it a domestic dispute gone wrong. Others screaming that it was a cover-up to protect the Frost legacy. But the one fact that nobody can deny is that the autopsy exposed a gap in the story so wide it cannot be ignored. And then comes the piece of history that makes everything even murkier. 'Cause back in April, just months before his death, Thood had already been shot in another incident that left him hospitalized. He survived that time and tried to move forward, but for fans and family, the idea that he was targeted once and then successfully killed only a few months later is too much to chalk up to bad luck. Was someone after him? Was he being silenced? Was there a bigger game being played where his life was simply expendable? These are the questions that turn a tragic shooting into a conspiracy. Because patterns matter, and when a man is attacked twice in the same year, it looks less like coincidence and more like persistence. The streets of Atlanta picked up on that immediately. Conversations in barbershops, debates in clubs, TikTok edits of his music layered with captions like, "He deserved better." The energy of a community that feels like the official story is a script, written to protect the powerful rather than to uncover the truth. Adding fuel to the fire was the silence of the Frost family. Rashida and Kirk, who are never shy to post glamorous photos and brand deals, suddenly vanished from commentary about the case. Their polished Instagram presence colliding with a digital storm of angry comments demanding answers. Every post flooded with the same question. What about Thood? That silence speaks louder than words, because when you refuse to address a tragedy tied to your own family, the narrative fills in itself. And the narrative being written by the streets is ruthless. It says that wealth and influence are being used to shield their son while a grieving family is forced to hire a lawyer and scream for justice just to be heard. Ebony J., the woman who shares a daughter with Thood, has become the face of that fight, appearing with attorney Michael Winsky to declare that Thood's gun was never fired and that the police version of events cannot stand. Her words are heavy, with grief, but sharp with defiance, reminding everyone that her daughter deserves to grow up knowing her father was not the villain, but the victim. That image of a child robbed of her father is what keeps this case alive in the public consciousness. Because beyond the hashtags and headlines is a little girl who will one day read about how her father died, and the world wants that story too. Be truth, not spin. As vigils are held and murals of Thood start appearing on walls around the city, the case only grows louder. And the detail of those 5 bullets that tore through him without a single shot fired back becomes the rallying cry that the community refuses to let go. The fact that this tragedy is tied to a family with money and TV fame makes it even more toxic, because history has shown that when influence collides with justice, the scales rarely balance fairly, and people fear that without relentless pressure, this too will be swept under the rug. The lawyer's presence signals that the family of Thood is not willing to let that happen. But the streets know that legal battles move slow, and that in the meantime, narratives can be twisted. Reputations can be protected, and the truth can be buried. That is why every conversation keeps circling back to the same haunting question. If Thood never fired his gun, then how can anyone stand there and call this self-defense? And until that question is answered, the name Thood will not fade from Atlanta's lips, because it is no longer just about one man's death. 'Tis about power, silence, and the fight for justice in a city that refuses to stay quiet. Asterisk, the storm that followed the release of the autopsy did not just shake Atlanta, it ripped through every corner of the internet and every corner of the city, because suddenly the whispers that people had been trading in private were confirmed in cold medical detail, and when those details hit the public eye, the reaction was explosive. 5 bullets to the body, not one from Thood's own gun. It's a kind of revelation that strips away every layer of the self-defense claim the police were trying so hard to sell. People took to social media like it was a battleground. Twitter threads breaking down the autopsy line by line, TikTok creators reenacting the night like it was a crime series, and Instagram lives turning into heated debates with thousands of viewers all demanding to know how this could possibly be called anything but murder. And then came the so-called leaks from anonymous sources. Stories whispered to bloggers and podcasters about tension between Thood and members of the Frost family long before that August night. One supposed source claimed they heard arguments about money, about respect, about Thood's relationship with Kelsey Frost causing friction in a household where reputation mattered more than reality. Another claimed there were warnings that Thood had enemies lining up against him. Enemies. With influence, enemies who would not be satisfied until he was out of the picture. Of course, none of these leaks can be confirmed, but in the court of public opinion, they were more than enough to ignite theories that this was never a simple domestic dispute. It was a setup playing out behind closed doors. As the conversation spiraled deeper into speculation, the Frost family's silence only added fuel to the fire. Rashida and Kirk Frost, usually quick to address rumors about their marriage or their business, stayed completely quiet. No statements, no interviews, no acknowledgement of the storm building around their son. That silence was read as strategy, a deliberate choice to wait out the outrage. But the public saw it as arrogance, proof that the powerful could hide behind their fame while a grieving family begged for justice. Ebony J., standing with attorney Michael Winsky, became the voice that cut through that silence. Her grief sharpening into anger as she repeated again and again that her daughter's father did not fire his weapon and did not deserve to be branded the aggressor. Winsky himself turned every press appearance into an indictment of the narrative, hammering home the point that 5 shots into a man who never shot back is not defense. It is destruction. It is targeted violence. It is the opposite of what the police tried to frame. And when Winsky spoke, the city listened, because his words matched what the autopsy already made undeniable. Meanwhile, online detectives began pulling together every piece of evidence they could find. Screenshots of old posts, cryptic captions from Kelsey Frost's social media, even clips from old episodes of Love and Hip Hop being replayed for supposed clues about the Frost family dynamic. Fans pored over these scraps like investigators piecing together a case the system seemed unwilling to pursue. And the conclusions were always the same. This was bigger than a fight gone wrong. It was layered with power, influence, and secrets. Some theorized that the April shooting Thood survived was directly connected to the August tragedy, that the first attempt failed and the second succeeded. And that raised even darker questions about who really wanted him gone. Was it personal jealousy? Was it financial disputes? Was it protection of an image? Or was it something deeper tied to circles that prefer their problems disappear quietly? Each theory sounded wild, but the more you stacked them against the silence of the Frost family, the more believable they became, because if the truth was as simple as self-defense, then why was there no transparency? Why was there only silence? The fallout spilled from social media into the streets as vigils turned into rallies where crowds demanded justice with candles in one hand and posters of Thood in the other. Murals of his face began appearing across Atlanta, painted larger than life with messages like "Gone too soon" and "Justice for Thood" scrawled beneath, transforming neighborhoods into living reminders of the case. At the same time, mainstream media outlets picked up the story, but the divide in coverage was obvious, some echoing the police narrative of a domestic dispute under investigation, others leaning toward the version pushed by the family that Thood was the victim of targeted violence. That split mirrored the fight playing out online. It's a tug-of-war over reputation versus reality, power versus grief, silence versus truth. And in that split, the name Thood only grew heavier, because whether you believed the official story or not, you could not deny the facts carved into his body. 5 shots, no return fire. The Frost family may have thought their silence would protect them, but instead it backfired. Every glossy Instagram post met with floods of comments demanding answers. Every brand deal announcement drowned in accusations. Every family photo twisted into a reminder of what they refused to speak about. Their silence was meant to shield, but it became a spotlight, casting them as villains in the narrative, whether they intended it or not. Because the public does not forgive silence when a man is dead and a family is crying for justice. And the longer the silence stretched, the more people believed that power was bending the story. That influence was buying time, that the system was dragging its feet in the hope that outrage would burn out. But this time, outrage refused to cool. Because in Atlanta, the name thood had become more than a headline. It had become a rallying cry that people repeated in barbershops, in clubs, in classrooms, and on corners. A name too loud to ignore and too heavy to bury. The deeper the case sank into the public eye, the more it felt less like an investigation and more like a war over truth. Because on one side stood the official narrative built on vague police statements, and the convenient word self-defense, while on the other side stood an autopsy that told a story in numbers and wounds and silence. 5 bullets, no return fire, a father dead while his own gun stayed cold. Attorney Michael Winsky kept hammering this point like a drumbeat, and every time he said it, the city echoed it back louder until it no longer sounded like a legal argument, but like a chant of resistance. Ebony J. became the heart of this fight. Not a celebrity, not a public figure, just a grieving mother determined that her daughter would grow up knowing the truth about her father. That he was not a threat, not the aggressor, but the victim of something that looked less like chance and more like calculation. Every interview she gave pulled the curtain back further on the raw pain of losing thood. Her voice shaking but steady as she insisted that silence and spin would not win this time. Behind her, the community gathered, people who had never met. Thood lighting candles, posting his picture, making sure his name stayed alive. Because to them, this was bigger than one man. It was about how many times the same story gets repeated. A young black artist cut down, a powerful name left untouched. A system that hesitates when influence is involved. As weeks passed and the Frost family still refused to break their silence, the backlash turned relentless. Each glossy photo on their feeds was immediately flooded with thousands of comments, not about music or fashion or TV, but about thood, about the bullets, about the unanswered questions. The longer they tried to maintain their polished image, the uglier the contrast became, because while their world seemed filtered and perfect, the other side of Atlanta was still standing in the rain holding vigils, still spray painting murals, still demanding justice. Silence may have been their strategy, but it became their downfall, because when you say nothing, you allow the streets to write the story for you, and the story being written was brutal. That wealth and TV fame were being used to protect a son whose name was tied to a homicide. And with every day that passed without charges, the belief hardened that justice was being delayed. Not by evidence, but by influence. That kind of perception cannot be erased with a press release or a photo shoot, because once the streets believe a cover-up is in play, they refuse to let it go. They push harder. They shout louder. They turn grief into momentum. Asterisk, by now the pressure on Gwinnett County officials was immense. Activists staging protests outside courthouses, journalists demanding updates. Fans turning into online investigators, creating entire timelines of events, dissecting every detail of that night in August. Some claim they had seen evidence suppressed. Others claimed they had connections telling them charges were being stalled. But whatever the truth, the one fact everyone agreed on was that this was no longer a local tragedy, but a national scandal, one tying a beloved rapper's death to the famous Frost name. If charges were filed, it would become one of the most high-profile trials in Atlanta history. A reality TV family dragged into the harsh light of a courtroom. Their son forced to stand accused, not on a scripted set, but in front of a judge and jury. If charges were not filed, the backlash would be louder. The city ready to erupt with accusations that the system bends for money and fame. Either way, the world would be watching, because the story had grown too big to hide. Too loud, too silent, too heavy to push away. And beneath all the chaos, beneath the hashtags and the headlines, the murals and the conspiracy threads remained. The simple, devastating truth that a man is gone, a father is gone, and a daughter will grow up asking why. That truth is what fuels the fight, because while debates rage about motives and suspects in silence, a family is left with an empty chair at the table and a child left without the man who should have been there to guide her. That image, more than any autopsy or legal statement, is what keeps the city restless, keeps the chants alive at vigils, what keeps the name thood echoing across Atlanta. And as long as that image remains unanswered, the storm around this case will not die down, because justice is not a headline. It is a demand. And in this story, that demand has only grown louder with each passing day. So now we are left standing at the edge of a story that refuses to close, a case that has already outgrown silence and spin, and a name that will not fade no matter how many headlines try to move on. Thood's death is not just another tragic footnote. It is a mirror held up to power, influence, and the way justice can bend when the wrong names are involved. The autopsy screamed the truth. The lawyer carried it forward. The family lifted it like a banner, and the people of Atlanta refused to let it be buried. But this fight is far from over. The courts have yet to speak. The Frost family has yet to answer, and the questions remain heavier than ever. Will charges come? Will accountability finally land where it belongs? Or will this story join the long list of unfinished battles where grief outweighed truth? That is why your voice matters. Do not just watch this case unfold in silence. Share this story, demand answers, push the truth louder than the silence. Like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe so we can keep pulling back the curtain on stories they want you to forget.